This is a Jack Kemp Oral History Project interview with William Bennett, former Education Secretary and Jack Kemp's partner at Empower America. We're doing this at the Jack Kemp Foundation in Washington, D.C. Today is December 11th, 2012, and I'm Morton Kondracki. Thanks so much for doing this.
Sure.
So when you think about Jack Kemp, what immediately comes to mind?
Well, I miss him, particularly now. I mean, Jack had the kind of lift and reach and enthusiasm that we don't associate with a lot of Republicans right now. I miss him too in personal terms. He was a close friend, one of the closest friends I had. And he was a wonderful opposite to me in a lot of ways. We were kind of like a marriage. We're compatible by being different, you know. And he taught me a lot. He taught me a lot about economics, but he also taught me a lot about optimism. I am probably chronically, constitutionally pessimistic. Catholic, original sin, darkness in man's soul, work to get out the light. Jack was not that. If Reinhold Niebuhr's book, The Children of Light, The Children of Darkness, I was a child of darkness. Jack was a child of light. So I needed him. He maybe needed me a little bit.
So where do you think that optimism came from?
California, quarterback, sunlight. I said we had a dinner once with football, with some football function, and he was throwing balls around. And he introduced me very generously and said, Bill and I played the same game. Well, first of all, you know, I played college football at Williams. He was a professional football player, for Pete's sakes. That's not the same game. Our big game was...
Were you a quarterback?
No. I said second, I was a tackle, interior lineman. I said for Jack, it was all sunshine, California, cheerleaders, touchdowns. For me, it was a guy named Kozlowski in the mud. You know, that's not the same game. And that, in some ways, kind of emblematic of our differences. But he was always very generous with me, even threw the ball at me and let me throw a few balls around. We had a touch football game. He came out too and brought Jimmy and Jeff, and we all played. And I got a lesson.
This was just one football game, or was it a regular
We had a regular touch football game on Sundays where the Kemp boys, when they were in town, would come. But Jack graced us with his presence once, which was great.
So besides optimism and lift, what would you say are his major character strengths?
Optimism and lift, I'd say them again, and no problem can't be addressed, solved. Belief that we could work together. I'm going to use football here a lot because it was a very important part of his life and a metaphor. It's an important part of my life too. When I was Secretary of Education, I was the first person asked to name the most influential teacher in my life, and I named my high school football coach. So this was a very important common ground for me and Jack. But what I'm getting to is that Jack believed in the huddle. If you all got together, we could work it out, and you could score, you could win, you could solve the problem. And you know, although he would make sounds and noises when you were giving him some bad news, he'd have the telltale Kemp, He'd then say, all right, now what do we do? How can we make this work? And he went to work on it. He had a great mind, analytical mind. He studied hard. I first met Jack, or is that part of your sequence?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
When, through Irving Kristol, you would think a couple of jocks like I would meet at a, you know, in the 40-yard line. I met him through Irving Kristol, and Irving said, here's one of your fans. And Jack said, oh, you follow Congress? I said, no, I follow football. And then I heard the story Kristol told me that Jack had asked him for a reading list. I'm sure you've heard the story. He read all the books that Irving gave him. He saw Irving about 8 weeks later and said, give me a reading list, another reading list. He said, I already gave you one. Jack said, I already read all those books. And so Irving gave him another one. He was a good student, a very good student. He would say he was a late student. You know, he came to it late, but all the passion and conviction of the autodidact. And loved to quote. As he quoted speeches, he loved to quote books. He was infectious, alive, infectious, intellectually serious, curious, and optimistic, important.
What was Irving Kristol's book list, do you know?
I don't remember. It was, I'm sure, classics. I'm sure The Federalist. I'm sure Jaffa and Burns and all that stuff, you know, the battle, the neocons and the cons, Straussian stuff, and also I'm sure economics books.
So if he had flaws, what were they?
Optimism and lift. I told him once, I said, if you believed in original sin, you'd be the President of the United States. I said, if you could just ever, it's not just optimism and lift, it was that extended hand. He believed everyone was a potential friend. He had no enemies, so he just didn't. And he'd say, you know, Charlie Rangel, great guy. And I'd say, I don't know about Charlie Rangel being a great guy. He was my chairman. I knew Charlie pretty well. Everybody was a great guy. Jack got along with everybody. It led him to believe that people would act in reliable ways that they would keep their word, that they could be trusted, and that he often got burned. So I think that was a problem for him. But one of the worst hours of my life was the debate with Al Gore, where he didn't engage Gore. He didn't take Gore on. He wanted to be friends with Gore, and he wanted to have a friendly debate in the best spirit of congeniality and, what's the word we use, comedy. But he needed to hit him a little bit. But Jack wasn't one to hit. He'd get hit, like he got hit in football. He'd get up. But he wasn't one to throw a punch. And politics ain't beanbag. Is that a weakness? Probably, because, you know, I'm thinking of someone else you're probably talking to in this, Newt Gingrich. When Newt hit his high point during the primaries, I'm not saying this was the greatest moment of the primaries, but it's when people said, I want Newt in there because Newt'll take him on. Newt'll throw a punch. And I would say to my radio audience, is that what you want? I mean, is that what we want, the president? Yes, actually it is. That's what we want. Jack wouldn't throw a punch. I never saw him throw a punch, I don't think.
What prevented him from throwing a punch? I mean, he'd seen lots of punches thrown in football.
And received plenty. I don't know. His mother, his goodness, a kind of gentleness, the belief that we could all get in a huddle, all 11 of us, and no matter what our views and our convictions and our backgrounds, we could all work it out together. There was that just indomitable optimism and pragmatism.
Did you ever talk to him about quarterbacking and life, and quarterbacking and leadership?
I don't think explicitly. I mean, he was a natural and obvious leader. Having come as a quarterback, you know, a lot of these guys are. But no, my advice to him was always I kind of got tired of my advice to him, was always to look on the dark side, the downside. I got tired of listening to myself. I'd say, Jack, there's trouble here. There are people here we can't be sure of. There are downsides to this proposal. But he woke me up to so many things and led me on so many things and educated me on a lot of things.
Such as?
You know what I was thinking of lately on the way over? Prop 187. You know about that in California. And he called me up and said, we got to do this. We have to lead on this.
Just explain what.
It was a state initiative on immigration, very similar to the issues we're talking about now. And it was whether, I can't remember exactly, but it was about providing services to immigrants and the children of immigrants. And California wanted to deny those services, schools, hospital care, and so on. And Jack and I talked about it. We wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. It was a big op-ed. It was big because it got a lot of attention, a lot of negative attention. And there was a lot of heat. We were both at Empower America at the time. I wasn't sure I wanted to sign on to it. And then he talked me into it. And he talked me into it by making the arguments for it. And I still hear about it. You know, when I get engaged in the immigration debate now on the radio, people say, I hope you're not going back to your 187 thing, you know, that sort of business. But we were right in what we said, and still right. And that was, Jack talked me into that. He talked me into joining Empower America. He said there would be no fundraising, very little travel, you know, total lies. And and not too many nights out. Again, and there won't be a problem. We'll raise the money. But there were plenty of problems. He also educated me about NAFTA, which, that's not my areas. We used to joke at Empower America that, people came into the sunny end, Jack's end, and then they'd come down to my end. They'd say, "What's going on down here?" And I'd say, "Sex, drugs, and rock and roll." But like, they'd stay a while just to see what was going on. They were curious, but I didn't know a lot about other issues than the issues I knew about. He educated me about NAFTA, and my reward there wasn't a bad thing. Was Bill Clinton gave a speech and thanked a number of people for NAFTA, and thanked Jack Kemp and Bill Bennett for their leadership. We also, wouldn't want to forget this, talked during the time of the Clinton troubles about the president needing to resign. And I think I led Jack in that conversation. And we decided, I don't know which of us did, but we decided to go see Joe Lieberman. And it was the most memorable conversations in Washington. We went to see Lieberman, and we told him that he was Nathan to Clinton's David, and that he, Lieberman, had the moral credibility and the standing to go to Clinton and tell him that he had to step down. And Lieberman, was embarrassed. You guys, whoa, that's a big job. And he won't do it even if I tell him. But Jack was eloquent and persuasive and gutsy. And
what did Jack say to Lieberman about that?
I wish I could remember exactly. I just remembered that I thought I was going to be doing most of the talking when we got there. As usual, Jack did most of the talking because he was good at it. And
was it the disgrace to the presidency, the
Yes.
demeaning of the presidency?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Disgrace to the country. And, you got to go. We've got to put this behind us. And when we watched Lieberman's speech on the floor, you probably remember that. He came, I thought, that close because it was a very, very tough speech, and we were wondering whether he was going to pull the trigger. He didn't, for whatever reasons he had, but it wasn't for lack of our trying.
You and Kemp both came out publicly for Clinton's resignation?
I did. I don't remember if Jack did. I wrote a book, Death of Outrage, and it was the #1 bestseller. Carville was #2. It was Defense of Clinton. Remember that? These are the things you remember.
So what other all-time favorite memories do you have of Jack?
Well, the social ones. Sundays going over to the Holy Sepulchre and watching football. Several games at once. The knocks on the door, just bursting into my office. Be on the phone, be in the meeting, be there with 3 people in tow. The head of some corporation, some former NFL star. This is Joe Smith. This is Bill Bennett. This is a great guy. This is a great guy. He's a great guy. You're a great guy. Are laughing about the fact that he gave out footballs, signed footballs, and I gave out signed books. And I confessed to him that I really would like to switch. And he confessed to me that he'd really like to switch. It was very funny. Closest with the family. Got to know that family very well. And Jack, mine. And for all the sporting events Jack went to as a father and grandfather, he ended up going to sporting events of my kids. That was a big deal, and it wasn't even a football game. It was a national championship high school lacrosse game. So that was a very...
At least it wasn't soccer, right?
No, it wasn't soccer. That's correct. That's correct. I shared that. The other things I remember were just so many meetings of intermediaries. People coming to me saying, "You got to talk to Jack," Gene Kirkpatrick, or "Can you talk Jack into this?" Or Vin Weber. Now, poor Vin. Vin is the guy who was always the intermediary, always the guy who had to give Jack the bad news or explain to Jack you couldn't do this. But he was well practiced because he had to do this for Newt Gingrich for several years, right? But there was always that. Can you get to Jack? Can you talk to Jack? Can you explain to Jack? Board members. Can you hold Jack back on this? Can you control Jack? No, I can't. I can't control Jack.
What kind of trouble did Jack get into?
Overreaching, overpromising. Sure, we can do that. Empower America can do this, that, and everything else. I can't remember specifics. We were supposed to have a pretty narrow charter, and we were going to do this kind of stuff with Gene Kirkpatrick and school choice with Bill Bennett and Jack, enterprise zones. And then it was just the latest enthusiasm, person who walked through the door, Jack would entertain it because he had that capacity to enjoy an idea in its presentation as much as the person presenting enjoyed that idea. It's a great empathetic gift.
So when did you first become aware of him?
Football. Game against the Jets. The Jets won and won the Super Bowl. New York, I think the game was in New York. No, I was.
Well, he played in Buffalo.
Yes, but this was a championship game, playoff game in Jets Stadium in New York. The Jets were at home because I think they had a better record. Check the record on that, but
you were there?
I watched him.
Okay.
No. But I watched him, and I was an AFL fan. I was an original American Football League fan, so I knew all those guys. I thought those guys were being very badly treated and should have been allowed, equality. But the powers that be in the NFL wouldn't let them. So when I met Jack,
why is that?
Well, it was Roselle, it was the monopoly. It was not letting these guys in. These were upstarts, not sharing the wealth. So when I met Jack, I remember he was impressed that I knew the names of all these guys, all these obscure guys, these Buffalo Bills football players. And, gradually they all made their way through the Empower America offices. And, we had a big poster up in our kids' room with my kids were Buffalo Bills fans, and it had Jack Kemp and O.J. Simpson. And then we took the poster down later. But anyway, so no, that's how I first knew him. Mm-hmm. Didn't know anything about the congressional
And so
stuff.
what did you think about him when you just knew him as a football player?
Great. I mean, he held records. I mean, he used to kind of do the light touch on his football career. But, he held a record for rushing touchdowns for a quarterback till, what's his name, from the 49ers?
Montana.
No, the Mormon, Steve Young, broke it. Jack will tell you he owned the rushing title because he didn't have any protections. He had to scramble and run. But no, I was impressed. He was a big time ball player, great quarterback. Sorry, I've been up too long, so
that's okay. So politically, I mean, he runs for Congress. He gets involved in Kemp Roth and stuff like that. You were a Democrat,
yeah.
right?
What year is Kemp Roth?
Kemp Roth he introduced it first in '76, and then of course it became the basis of Reaganomics in '81.
Right.
So, did you follow his?
Yes, I was here. I was aware of it. I was, a Reagan appointee. I was chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, so I was paying only tangential attention to it. I was, in my own little academic thing there. But yes, I was aware of Jack Kemp and the significance of that.
So, how did Irving Kristol bring you together?
That was before that. That was, I think, late 70s. When Kristol introduced us in New York. But then Jack and I were in the cabinet together, or sort of. If you count me being in the cabinet, was the drug czar cabinet.
This is Bush.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And we got in a lot of trouble because we were the bad boys in the cabinet. And you know about Jack's fight with James Baker and all that.
Well,
Jack and I
tell us about that.
Well, I don't know the details of it, but I know they had a lot of bad words between them. And I had big disagreements with Baker, too, on policy. But Jack and I...
What were your disagreements with Baker? You were a drug czar then.
I got to be sure this is fine. I think it is. I think it's in my book. I had some plans for things I wanted to do in Colombia. And I had most of the cabinet support. I had the vice president's support. But I had to persuade the president. And... Baker stood in my way. It was, we could in one night take out all the cocaine processing plants. in Columbia. There were only about 17 of them at the time, if my memory is right. And Colombian government was in favor of it. And we could do it with helicopters and our guys. And it could be one night's work, and it would stop, essentially, the flow of cocaine for maybe 9 months, 12 months, assuming they could then go back and build them up again. And I wanted to get this plan through. I got it through at the sub-cabinet level with, smart people like Frank Keating and others, people who knew a lot. And then Baker and Nick Brady blocked it, and they had Bush's ear, of course.
It was war?
Huh?
Because it was war?
Yeah. They're worried about war, Vietnam, stuff like that. I said, hey, they want us to come. Well, so the South Vietnamese were not troops. This one night, we're out of there. Lots of arguments. But they were different from Jack's arguments. But we would often plot before a cabinet meeting how we would do a 1-2. And there was one we did with the taxes when Bush was going to go raise the taxes, and Jack was crazy. I mean, I said, well, I don't know the arguments. He said, well, you just follow my lead. And it was kind of comical.
What happened?
Because we're at the cabinet meeting, and Jack is over, let's see, here's the table. The president's here, and Jack is over here. And
Cross?
Yeah, cross. And the president's left, and I'm over here, the president's right, the other side of the table, the president's side. And Jack is talking, and we had rehearsed this. And he's making his case, and the president's nodding, and then Jack just keeps going, goes too long. And I start going, and Jack goes, not picking up. And Jack goes, and the president turns on. It's really ridiculous, Bill? Fine, sir.
So did you ever intervene?
I said, yeah, I had like 3 sentences. I remember what I said, because it was the same thing I said when they asked me to be RNC chairman. I said, this wasn't a campaign promise. This was your campaign. This was the heart of it. And this is not a matter of just policy. This is a matter of a commitment. But Jack went on, had a lot more to say, and of course argued policy, and we lost. But there was then a cartoon, I don't know if you've seen it, I think it was Business Week, and it had Bush leading a symphony, and everybody was there in their tuxedos, and over on the side, there's a guy playing the piano with a cigar, another guy blowing a saxophone, that's Bennett and Kemp. We had our own music, which I think was a little overdone, but we would speak out, I'd say more often than others, on things and make our views known very loudly. Like Jack and I on the David Duke thing. The president wanted to take a neutral position, so you can't.
So David Duke was running for
Senate.
Senate,
wasn't
in
it? Or
Louisiana.
Senate or governor.
He was a Ku Klux Klansman.
Well, sympathetic to it, but he was a Republican, so don't speak ill. I said, you just got to, Mr. President, you just got to. Jack called the president on that, and I saw the president. We were doing some drug thing, and I said, you just gotta speak out on this. Can't have any ambiguity about this. And
did
so
Jack
that
bring that up in a cabinet meeting?
I don't remember, but I know he brought it up. Felt very strong. That was the sort of thing, things that hit our buttons,
So did you become close when you were both Bush cabinet members, or before that?
I guess that's when we became close. Yeah, and then one of the reasons we were close is kind of the adoption of Elaine Bennett by Joanne. Joanne had been here longer and invited Elaine to her Friday group, about Friday group. Big deal. Huge effect on Elaine. And Elaine wasn't sure,
When was that?
I think early 80s. I don't know how long it's been going. It's been going a long time. I think early 80s. But I remember how grateful Elaine was for Joanne kind of taking her under her wing and introducing her to other women who were, saw the world a similar way. And so that led to us becoming friends with the Kemps, going out to the house and doing things like that.
This is while you were education secretary or
yes,
NEH?
Yes, later, more education secretary, yeah. I may have my years off there. But yes, certainly when education secretary.
Did he get involved in education policy at all?
He was very interested in it. Obviously, he would often say, "School choice is the enterprise zone for the kid." I mean, the analogies were great, and we borrowed from each other's stuff on that. And he was always available to speak on that.
More about the dynamics of the Bush administration. So he supposedly intervened a lot in cabinet meetings on issues that had nothing to do with HUD.
Right.
Do you remember any of those?
I don't ever remember intervening on HUD. Yeah, and he taught me that you could too. He'd say, "Well, you have a great." He said, "What you said today was." I remember he said today was really smart. He said, "It's a very bad lesson for our children." He said, "You can say that about anything."
What's a bad lesson?
Not to help the Contras. Okay? So I said, right. That was always an opportunity for me to say what I wanted to say about a particular issue. Yeah, no, he was very...
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand that.
That I had this cover as the education secretary. I could take any issue as long as I framed it in, "Well, Mr. President, I really think you should help the Contras." Why? Well, it's a bad lesson to our children if you don't. As the education secretary, we're always teaching here, But I didn't do it as much as he did because, well, another word, Jack, you've heard before, irrepressible. He was a bit like, the kid who thoughts in the head that comes out. And he didn't always...
Do you remember any specific interventions besides the ones you mentioned?
No, I could probably think of some. But it was rare that there was a cabinet meeting that Jack didn't speak.
Did he get dressed down, ever?
Not by the president, but you could see the looks from some of the, senior cabinet people, Bakers and the Bradys. Yeah.
He must have been into Brady's business a lot.
Sure.
Treasury Secretary.
Sure he was. And, he was into foreign policy. And he educated me there a lot.
Were you there when Baker said something to the effect that, the Jews didn't vote for us?
No, I wasn't
No.
there.
Okay.
I may have been at the meeting, but it was happened after a cabinet meeting, didn't it? Or just before?
Well, I'm not sure.
I think it was in the White House. It was in the cabinet room, I think. But I think it was after cabinet meeting. That was the sharp exchange. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I heard about it.
And supposedly Baker once said, "You're not Treasury Secretary. You're not Commerce Secretary. You're Housing Secretary. You're not blankety blank Secretary of State," or something like that. Did you?
I don't think I was there, but I remember hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
No, that was always edgy.
And how did Jack feel about Baker?
Jack liked everybody, liked Baker, but he just thought Baker was wrong on stuff. With Jack, it was never a bad feeling. It was just, he doesn't understand, he doesn't see. So if he had a disagreement there, I had the feeling with Baker, it was always, there was always an element of he's smarter and knows better, and also territorial, jurisdiction. This is mine, not yours.
During the going back a little earlier, when you were Education Secretary, Kemp is the leader on Capitol Hill, and he is supporting Reagan basically on foreign policy and stuff. But there were occasions on tax policy, on foreign policy and stuff like that, that he got off the reservation even then. Do you recall any of that?
No.
What did you do in the '88 campaign?
88 is New Orleans.
Yes. '88 is Kemp is running, Bush is running, Dole is running.
I was for Kemp, and can't remember what I did, what events I did. I was for Kemp, and thought he had a great debate with Bush.
That was Houston?
Yes, he did. That was a good one, right? I think so. I remember. But yeah, we wanted Jack. We thought he'd be great. Be a good, great charismatic leader, great president. And then but I remember, actually, what I remember more was really working hard to get him on the ticket in New Orleans before the announcement
did you
came.
do?
Just called a lot of people and everybody I could think of and lobbied. And I remember Elaine was working on it. I was working on it. And was very disappointed that he didn't get it. And we had a dinner that night. It was about 24 people at Commander's Palace, maybe. And we were all waiting for Jack, and Jack came in late. And it was, I think, the day Quayle was announced. We were all kind of deflated. But before Jack came to see us, he went into the kitchen. Talked to everybody in the kitchen. Man ahead of his time. And shook hands with everybody. And then he joined us. But that was a big disappointment. I thought he'd be a great candidate. I was then asked to do one of the nominating speeches for Quayle, which I did. And then later with Dole, Kemp, I was asked to give one of the nominating speeches for Kemp. Do you know the Dole story with me?
No.
Dole wanted to do a speech in,
This is what year?
this is for 96.
96.
Dole wanted to give a speech. Somebody persuaded Dole to give a speech on the culture. So he gave one at Fox Studios, and I wrote it, and a few other people worked on it, speechwriters,
Fox Studios,
in LA.
LA.
But we had an idea that before that, we should go to a movie. And the movie was Independence Day. You remember the movie?
I remember it well.
So we took Bob Dole to the movies. There was a little tension because it was Liddy's birthday, and she'd hoped they were going to have the day. But we said, nope, we got to go to the movies. So I sat with the candidate, Dole, and Elizabeth in the movie theater, and it was over. Of course, huge. It was the summertime, summer '96. Huge crowd of journalists outside. Before we went out, Dole's campaign guy, who was it? Scott Reed, maybe? Mm-hmm. Said, Secretary, before we go out, you're the culture guy. What do you recommend the senator should say? I said, well, it's a great movie about America. I said, everybody's working together. We got a black guy, and we got a Jewish guy, and we got a whatever. We all come together, work together, and defeat the common enemy. I said, got it, Senator? Yeah, the senator goes out. I said, what do you think of the movie? Dole says, black, white, Jew, America. No conjunctives, no verbs, right? Just hilarious. Classic Bob Dole. So he says, how about breakfast? We had breakfast. And he said, who do you think I should have my running mate? And I said, I've been thinking about names. Somebody said Don Nichols the other day, and I said, I think you should have Kemp. He said, I'm not going with Kemp. I'm not going with Kemp. I said, why? He said, his ideas. I don't agree with his ideas. He's a great guy. I don't agree with his ideas. And I said, what do you think of me? He said, what about you? I said, me? He said, yeah, you. I said, why me? He said, Eastern, Catholic, intellectual. I said, I said, I'm so touched. I'm so moved. It's so personal. Check. I said, no, I'm not your guy. I said, I can't do it. And I came back and told Jack. And I said, what do you think? He said, oh, man, you're crazy. You don't do it. I said, no, I can't. I don't believe in it. I don't, it's not my cup of tea. I'm not that excited about it. I don't think I'm the right guy. And besides, I wrote the Book of Virtues. And I remember we had that conversation. So what's wrong with having written the Book of Virtues? I said, well, if you did everything I did in my life, and you ran for president or vice president, and you hadn't written the Book of Virtues, it'd be fine. But if you've done everything I did in my life and write the Book of Virtues, you got a problem because people think you're holding yourself out. So any chink in the armor is going to look worse for the guy who seems to be preaching to the whole country. Huh? And Jack said, I still think you'll do it. And then when Jack got the nod, remember I said, this is great. This is just great. He said, well, he said, he should have gotten his first choice. Typical Jack. That was a...
How did you find out that he'd gotten the nomination? Or that he
I was
gonna
at
get
the office, and I got a call from who? Somebody. Jack, Bill Dow called somebody. But it was, the day of the announcement. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. By the way, I don't want to overstate it. I mean, I think Dole was asking about my interest. He wasn't offering it to me. I think he was fishing. But I wasn't interested. But it was typical of Jack.
Going back to the cabinet days, what do you think Jack achieved as HUD secretary?
Raised the profile of the office, obviously, to a degree that's never been there before. Became a spokesman for enterprise zones and ownership, and added a dimension to public policy and for the Republican Party that is a place that has not been taken by anybody else since, but of which we are now acutely aware after this election.
Did you work together with him on driving drug dealers out of public housing?
Yeah.
How did that go? What?
We met with Kemp, Chicago, and the various people. I wasn't central to it, I'd say, but he would always invite me. He'd go off to Cabrini Green or wherever he was going, and he'd invite me, and I went on some visits, some trips. And then we compared notes, and we loved doing that. I mean, it was great. And he encouraged me on my visits. When I was Secretary of Education, went to schools. I remember this, went to 120 schools. When I became drug czar, I decided to do the same thing. And it was Jack who said, you need to go to public housing. If you want to see the drug problem, you need to go to public housing. Why? I'll never forget. He said, there are no men there. That's where these guys go. It's all women and children. So these guys can go and take advantage and just beat the crap out of people. And he said, good place for you to go. Good place for you to go. You care about this problem, that's where you should go. So that was part of my education, thanks to Jack.
So he was frustrated in a lot of ways with the Bush administration. Did he share that with you?
He was frustrating. He was frustrated. He was very frustrating. He was also frustrating. Yeah, he was. The tax pledge was a big deal, and other things, other policy things. Jack just, is the guy who always had the better idea, and often was a better idea about how to do it and how to present. And he could be just brilliant, just dazzling. I give good speech. I give a good speech. But the best speeches I've seen in my lifetime by living people, 2 or 3 of them were given by Jack.
Which do you remember?
I don't know. Wrote them down. I got notes somewhere I can maybe find. I've also heard Jack give bad speeches. I've heard Jack give speeches which are virtually nothing but naming everybody in the room, for God's sakes. And he'd do that, and Vin and I would say, stop, stop. And there were many Jack Kemp moments like that. We had that Power America event in Chicago. I guess you get Vin to tell you this story. Can't remember the guy's name. I think it was Heisinger. One of the Heisingers, And this guy said something about immigrants, and we need to close the borders. And Jack said, what's your name? I said, Heisinger. Jack said, Heising. I said, I'm not sure this is the right name, so don't ask Vin. And he just said it about 9 times. And Vin and I were up there in the panel. Vin said, shut up, Jack, get off it. And this was often her refrain of ours.
This was in public or on the...
Sotto voce to me,
I see.
Vin, but we were all squirming.
No, but I mean, was he saying
Jack was
this to
doing it
the
in public.
audience?
Oh, yeah, it's a dinner thing. Heising, what are you? You're not Smith, you're Heisinger. You came from somewhere. Your family came from somewhere. And he was just berating this potential $1 million donor to Empower. We never got the money, I don't think. But that was Jack. Never gave it a thought. I remember Vin afterwards said, we can only do these events, if we can keep Jack Kemp under control. But since we can't keep Jack Kemp under control, maybe we shouldn't do these events.
Just to finish up on the cabinet days, Dick Darman,
Yeah.
he wrote in his book that the two conservatives in the cabinet, you and Kemp, were the ones who were always asking for money. And so Jack seems to have had a lot of run-ins with, in fact, Darman banned the word empowerment from administration documents, which was a direct rebuttal to you guys, I think. So do you remember any of Jack's specific run-ins with Darman?
I remember my run-ins with Darman, but I don't remember Jack's run-ins with Darman, but I'm not surprised. Because Darman was the architect, and he wanted it his way, and he had a very clear and concise view of what he should do.
It was all about money?
At the end of the day, it was the end of the day, it was, yeah. And yeah, I wanted more money for various things, but I thought, I'm a conservative, but this, I regarded the drug effort in those days as kind of an adjunct to the Defense Department. This is a legitimate function of government, particularly the stuff we were doing in Latin America, which was having some great effect. So, no, I was locking horns with Darman all the time, and Jack and I would often sympathize with each other about what a tough-minded son of a bitch he was. His son now works at Carlyle Group, and my son was there this summer, and his son was saying, my dad used to talk about his arguments with your dad and Jack Kemp and how much he enjoyed them. Didn't know he enjoyed them. Didn't know he enjoyed them. Good.
Okay, Empower America. How does it get hatched?
Jack, I don't know. Jack called me up and asked if I wanted to be one of the principals. And he said, Vin Weber's involved, and we'll get Gene Kirkpatrick, and you do your thing, we'll do our thing. And so it'll be great. We'll be the counterweight to what's going on, and important things for us to do.
Now this is
policy.
when?
93? Does that sound right? I think so.
Right after Clinton's
Right
inauguration?
after Clinton, yeah. And we'll be there. We'll be respectful disagreement, policy issues. There we were, 1700 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's where we were on 9/11. He said, it'll be fun, be good. And I told you, he said, it won't be much travel, won't be much fundraising, not be many nights out, all of which were untrue. But it was good, and we had a good board, and we had smart people, and we had a lot of arguments, because these are argumentative people, Steve Forbes and Ted Forsman, people like that. I was always regarded myself as a junior member, even though I was a full partner, because I didn't raise the money. Jack raised the money. Floyd Kwame raised the money. Ted Forsman raised the money. But I felt I had a place there, certainly. And we had great people there. We had great staff, young people, Pete Wehner, Paul Ryan, lots of good people.
So it was his idea?
I think so. Might have been Vin. So you've done Vin, right? Vin would know. Vin would also be modest. But I think it was Jack's idea, yeah. And it was just very, very, very good at that, because if you're going to be in opposition and you want to be listened to, and you want a hearing, and you want to be able to get a hearing even at the opposition White House, then you want to go about it the way Jack Kemp went about it. And I learned that from him. And so we were able to contribute to the debate on things like NAFTA and immigration policy and other things, where we were sometimes castigated by conservatives.
So, okay,
but then again, we were the conservatives in the Bush cabinet, so it's funny roles.
So what other issues did you take on?
I took on, I did drug policy. I did mostly education policy, and that's where there was a fair amount of overlap with Jack. And then we got into what you might call cultural policy. There was a fairly famous visit we made to New York. I went with Joe Lieberman and Dolores Tucker, and we went to see the guys at Time Warner about gangster rap and some of that stuff. And that became fairly high-profile criticisms of some of the music and some of the stuff that was coming out. and we gave out the Silver Sewer Award, contributions, which brought down American culture. We gave it to 60 Minutes for showing Jack Kevorkian killing somebody on television and other things. And that got a lot of attention because it was cultural stuff, and it was Hollywood and Hollywood versus Washington, and became pretty big stuff around.
This is the era of the Index of Leading Cultural
That's
Indicators.
correct. I did that. I wrote that. Thank you. I wrote that there first time, and published it at. Power didn't publish it. Heritage actually published it. I was a joint Heritage and Power, but then Rush read from it for weeks, and so it just like 3 million copies of it, and people became very interested in that. And that's when I make the joke about drugs, sex, rock and roll. But these were big issues, and still are big issues.
And so, what was Jack's output?
Jack's
Output. I mean,
enterprise zones, economics, economic policy, the HUD stuff. But I think it was mostly economics, tax policy, growth, the pie. I mean, it was classic Jack. That's what he did. That's what he did great.
But did he put out reports and products and stuff like that?
Yes, he and Larry Hunter and Ryan later. Lots of speeches, I think, reports. Then Jack, did a fair amount of stuff on the Hill. He was always Jack. He was still the Jack of Kemp Roth.
So was the idea of this that you were going to be a think tank, or you were going to be a...
No, we were a 501c4, so we were an action tank or something like that, policy. We can make policy recommendations, not endorse candidates, but come out strongly for policy. We weren't a think tank so much as a recommendation of policy tank, and which we did all the time on everything.
And what was your budget?
Wasn't much. Supposed to be paid, but I think most years I wasn't paid. I don't think Jack was paid. Staff was paid. I don't think Vin took anything or Gene took anything. Gene shared time with AEI. I shared time with
Was she ever there?
Heritage.
Did she ever?
Rarely,
Yeah.
rarely. But she was involved. She wasn't there during the days, but she came to evening events and functions and fundraisers, and she was present. Mm-hmm. And then, we took fairly high profile on things like, what's it called? Permanent normal trade relations, China, where I dissented from the group. Had my own reasons. But
Jack was for...
Yes, big letter that was signed by Jack, Vin, Gene, board members, Don Rumsfeld. I mean, it was a really lustrous board, and others. And that was a very typical kind of Empower America thing to do.
Because it was a free trade thing.
Right, and it was big names and high profile, and here's where we are, here's where we're with the Clinton administration, here's where we're not. It was actually, in retrospect, when it was started, I did it for friendship. I thought Jack asked me, I'll do it. Lane said, do it. But it actually was a good idea. Not a bad thing, where you weren't, knee-jerk opposed to everything that came out of the White House, the other party. You measured it and evaluated it, and we were treated pretty nice and respectfully by that White House.
So did you...
And that was also, remember the days of, you will remember this, being Morton Kondracki, for the days of the DLC. There was a DLC, and if you took the difference between the DLC and Empower America on issues, often there wasn't a lot of light.
Mm-hmm. Did the organization work that you would agree on what you were going to do and then put out a press release? Somebody would...
Yes, somebody had the lead, and then they'd pass it around. And I remember Jack would have a paper. I maybe couldn't understand it, but he'd want my signature on it. So I'd have Ryan or Pete Wehner or somebody explain it. And then if it was important for me to say yes and I understood it and was comfortable enough, I would. If I didn't, I'd pass. But on the big things, were things like that, permanent normal trade relations, Prop 187, NAFTA. We had a lot of discussion, debate.
And how long did it last? How long did it go?
Well, it sort of morphed into that Freedom Works thing, right? I'd want to say 5 years. Is that right? I think so.
So till through Clinton, or not all the way through Clinton. Where
I don't
was
think-
Jack in '96? So Clinton's inaugurated in '93. Jack runs for vice president in '96. Was he still with Empower America after that?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
You said that you were there in 9/11.
Yeah?
2011.
No, 2001.
2001.
Right. Yes, I was.
And was he?
Yeah, I guess so. Sure. Sure. So sure it lasted.
Were you actually in the office when the planes hit?
I was in, no, I was down the street. I was 2 blocks away doing a videotape on something else, and then I came back to the office, and it was when the Pentagon was being hit. And
Jack was there?
I don't think so. It was just chaos. It was people, I remember getting to 1701 Pennsylvania Avenue and seeing the White House just emptying, So it was, late morning. And then there were rumors, State Department's been bombed, everything's been bombed, Capitol's been bombed, people panicking. Yes, you're absolutely right, 2001, yep. So I guess I was there until probably 2002 or 3. I guess it lasted longer than that, 8 years. Yeah.
And Jack was there the whole way?
But it became, sometimes it was a more full-time affiliation than other times. If we had the money, or if you had to go get your money by giving speeches, which I was doing, or being at Heritage, then you spent more time there and you just dropped in once a week.
I take it that you were sort of independent operators. You did. I mean, you basically paid your way by making speeches and writing your books, and Jack did his by making speeches, Washington Speakers Bureau or something like that.
That's right. There wasn't much reason after Bush was elected for Empower America, because it was established to be a responsible voice of opposition.
Do you remember any fights with Clinton?
Well, no.
So who raised the money?
Jack and the board. Jack.
And who put the board together?
Jack. Floyd Kwame was our chairman. Nick Forsman was
Who
the
was
chairman.
Floyd Kwame?
Floyd Kwame was one of the founding chairmen of Kleiner Perkins. And the famous partner is the Democrat, John Doerr, and Floyd is the Republican. He gave lots of money to Empower. Nick Forsman gave a lot of money to Empower, and he and Jack were constantly arguing, fighting.
Over?
Everything.
Why?
Everything. I don't know, just he was a guy
Organizational things?
organizational policy, everything. Forsman just liked to argue. And he'd have these dinners in New York we'd go up to, where he'd have Julian Robertson and some of these other, huge investor, venture fund, what's the word I'm looking for?
Private equity?
Yeah, big guys.
Hedge funds?
Hedge funds, right, dinners, and, we would sing our song, try to get support. But Jack was always the lead.
Because he wasn't a great fundraiser when he was trying to raise money for his own political campaign.
No.
Was he better at
Yeah,
Empower America?
Yeah, it was better working to pay the staffs of other people, He was pretty good. But the chairman, when they took the job, knew that was a big part of their job.
This is Vin. Or
the
chairman of the
the
board.
various chairmen, Forbes, Forsman, Kwame.
And what was Vin's role? Vin Weber's.
Peacekeeper, intermediary. I think I quit 3 or 4 times. And Vin talked me, back off the ledge. Jack would call me. I don't know why I quit. For some reason or other. But Jack was forever inviting people to be fellows, and to be partners, and to be on the board, and to this. And you can work with Bill Bennett. No, I don't want to work with him. But that was Jack.
So who else was around? I mean, besides everybody knows about Pete Wehner, who was your assistant, right?
Yeah,
Chief assistant.
Yeah. He was kind of to me what Paul was to Jack. Yeah.
For how long? For how long was Paul Ryan there?
I want to say 2 years. We overlapped for 2 years, maybe 3. But then Paul and I became pretty good friends afterwards because of some common interests. Pete was there a long time, till he went to the Bush White House. with Karl Rove and Gerson. So that he went in 2000. And Hal Cole, someone else I know, David Quo, who wrote that book about Bush and religion, which damned him for with the conservatives forever. Who else was there? I can't remember.
So you were referring to the people of light and the people of darkness. I mean, supposedly, your big debate with Jack intellectually was over poverty. What supposedly, this is what I've heard, that in other words, he was a kind of an economic determinist, and you were more a culture person. And so, if his notion was that if you gave anybody the right incentives, they would do right in their lives, and you said no, that's too simple.
That's pretty close. That's pretty close. I thought.
Do you remember any specific, or was this ongoing?
It was ongoing. It was ongoing. I mean, Jack would say that ownership itself will transform. And I said, it can't transform character. He said, well, a guy who's never had anything and then he gets something, he has a chance then. So I'd say he has a chance, but if the right values haven't in some ways been inculcated in him, it can happen, but it's miraculous. And why can't we just agree that you give people opportunity, but you also need instruction, habits, Aristotle. And he'd say, fine, but you can't wait. So I mean, this was the argument that went on and on with us. I thought he was a bit, and I used to say, I said, you're just a Marxist. You're a Marxist, and a good guy Marxist. You just think it's all about opportunity and enterprise and giving people a chance, and I'm for that. But if people have the chance but don't have the wherewithal to take full advantage of the chance, they're going to blow it, and they'll default on their loans. I wasn't that smart. They'll blow it. They'll wreck their property. So that was the ongoing debate. And Jack was prepared to concede that, but always wanted to say it was complicated, but that you could never find out what was in people unless you gave them that opportunity. Fair enough. Fair enough. Look, I said, school choice was a very good place for us to meet, because if you're for school choice, it's in some ways you're more Kempian than Bennettian, if I can say that. You're for everybody having it, and that means some people won't make the right choice. But
and you agreed on school choice?
Yes.
Was he active on school choice?
Yes, he was. Certainly, totally, fully supportive. But he said, by your thesis, people aren't smart enough to do the right thing. I remember I had the hearing when I was Secretary of Education with Gus Hawkins. Remember Augustus Hawkins, who was chairman of the committee? And I said, the people in your LA district should have the opportunity to choose their schools. And he said, a lot of the people in my district aren't smart enough to make that choice. I said, well, they're smart enough to choose you. It's a funny moment. Jack loved that story, and he said, well, see, that's your view, right? They're not smart enough. I said, no, they are. This is about their kids, and they will listen to other people who inform themselves and follow, but this is a choice you should give people, certainly better than the current position. But there's no reason we can't try to educate people about what choices are the best choices to make too. Jack always talked about the fish and teaching a man how to fish. Give a man a fish, teach a man how to fish. I said, but teaching a guy how to fish is more than teaching him how to fish. It's teaching him to be patient and to tie things right and to sit in the boat all day and have perseverance and, the virtues. And I think Jack was somewhat persuaded, but never fully. And I was never fully persuaded of the transformation that takes place just with opportunity. I said, I've seen too many people have the opportunity and blow it. So that was our ongoing debate.
So were these bull sessions, or were these around specific issues?
They were both. They were bull sessions. They were constant. They were during football games. We were traveling together, and they were on panels, on policy debates, on everything we did. And Jack would talk and say, I know Bill Bennett is going to jump me now. but here's what I believe. And I'd say, no, I know Kemp is going to object here. But there, you know, we did the same thing publicly we did privately.
What were his work habits like when he was there?
I don't know. I mean, multitasking. I remember being in Philadelphia with him at the convention, and we went out to dinner, and a phone started ringing, and he didn't know which. He had 4 of them, and he was, you know, the whole person was ringing, you know. And he'd be carrying on a conversation. I marveled at that because I can't do that. And people would come up and say, "Oh, you're gonna make my friend Bill Bennett." I don't know. I don't know how he worked, but he worked. He was always working. I mean, I know he worked on planes, and he just have, you know, stacks of stuff, and he just go through it. Notes, longhand write notes. You know.
Did you do any foreign travel together?
Nope.
So
I did a lot of foreign travel. The drugs are a job, but not with Jack. You know, that was one difference in the jobs.
So tell me about you and Joanne and Elaine and Jack did stuff together. What did you do besides watch football?
Pretty much it. His house on Sunday, always his house. Sit around the pool. Well, Jack did bring a formative moment in my kids' development. Jeff played for the Eagles, and they played the Redskins here. And Jeff got off the bench and played in the game. He got sacked about 15 times. We watched the game on TV. 2 hours later, doorbell rang, and it was Jack and Jeff at the door, and my boys, then perfect age, like 14 and 9. And there was Jack Kemp and Jeff Kemp, and we just saw on TV. And it was just very generous of him to do that, typical kind of thing. But it was his house, it was his castle, and we were almost always there. If he came to our house, he was in and out fast. You know, he wanted to get to his house, his chair, his TV, his controls.
Did you go to Vail?
Yes, a couple times.
And
We had Empower stuff there. Mm-hmm. We didn't go to ski, we're not skiers, but we went to Vail for Empower stuff because we did the same show out there, yeah.
Okay. So where in conservatism, in the history of American conservatism, does Jack Kemp fit?
Well, very much in the, I don't know quite how what you mean by question, but I think very much in the Reagan tradition, if we can say that's a tradition. The Sonny brand of conservatism, optimistic, forward-looking, which we've never been in more need than we are now. Never needed Jack Kemp than we do now in that spirit. Forward-looking, what do you call us? Progressive conservatives? Is that what he called us? Something like
Sometimes
that.
bleeding heart, too.
Bleeding heart conservatives, progressive conservatism.
Big government conservative.
No,
No?
he didn't. Did he say that?
No, he didn't say
Not
that.
from me.
But he believed in a big HUD.
Yeah, I did believe in big HUD. I believed in a big Office of National Drug Control policy. But good-hearted, capacious, optimistic, encouraging, enabling, empowering. That's where he is.
So, but in terms of I guess so. This is Reagan. It's not Goldwater. It's not Russell Kirk. It's
Right.
not.
Right.
Was he a neoconservative? Do you think?
Sympathetic to neoconservatism, but
Irving Kristol was one of his mentors.
Oh, one of his godfathers, but didn't have that fundamental view of man's flawed nature. Believed that. I mean, I just always said, Jack, you're just this short of utopianism, the kind of stuff the left does, which gets us in so much trouble. So no, never get there. Don't believe in that. Right.
Did you ever talk to him about Christian Science
No.
and the influence that had?
No.
That's very positive.
No.
No.
What, did it have an influence on him?
He was a Christian Scientist as a kid. Yeah.
As a kid.
Yeah.
Didn't know
And
that.
some people think that he never stopped having.
Yeah, well, maybe.
So you regard him as an intellectual.
Yes, first rate. Not the normal type, but he could parse an idea fast. And he'd come in and say, what is this? What does this mean? And I, explained it as best I could. He was fast. Once he got it, he wanted to move on to something else. He was impatient. And, certain definitions of intellectual require a certain scholarly disposition or temperament, which he did not have. He had the temperament of an activist and a doer. But yes, I regard him as an intellectual, for sure.
And
very little he couldn't grasp, except the fundamental nature of man.
Okay. And obviously you think he was smart.
Yeah, you bet. And so good and so generous, First call I got when that gambling story hit on me was Jack. And it was just a call of friendship. And, come on out, we'll have dinner. And then it was just very sweet, very Jack.
So what was your relationship with him post Empower America?
We were still close friends, more the house and visits, and saw him less frequently. But probably as much through Elaine and Joanne, because she still goes. She'll be going this Friday, the Friday group. And then some relationship with the kids. I mean, I developed, I think, a pretty good friendship with Jeff, and went out there to speak for his group a couple times. In some ways, Jeff's work was closer to my work, the culture front, the values front. And then with Jimmy, similar.
Some people describe Joanne as the ground of Jack's, that she grounded him.
I think that's right.
What does that mean?
Diogenes, the philosopher who was looking for an honest man, they say he was always looking this way, but there were a lot of potholes. He had a guy around with a lantern who was making sure he didn't step in them. Joanne, Jack, you can't do that because you're going to be in Philadelphia. Jack, do you want to say goodbye to the guests who are leaving? She looked out for him in all those ways and grounded him. Yeah, his anchor.
So what do you think that his example should teach the contemporary political operators of both Democrats and Republicans, but Republicans especially?
Well, I think it's Republicans especially. I mean, I think his moment is now, and he had a moment, of course, with Kemp and other things. But I think his moment is now, and the party very much needs to rediscover Jack Kemp and the spirit of Jack Kemp. There have been things written about Paul, that he's the natural heir to Jack.
All right.
Personality is very different, very different. But there's certainly some similarities. There's a sunniness, there's an optimism there. But never has the party needed what Jack is and stood for more than it does now. But I think that even though, it's hard to evaluate a person merely through the present in terms of what they'll be in the future, I think that stature, he will maintain that stature. Perhaps it'll be, he will be needed less, perhaps, I hope, in the future because we have other people to step up. But I think he'll be regarded as one of the major conservative figures of the 20th century.
Since you followed all the way through, what was his opinion of George W. Bush as president?
I don't know.
I've heard that he was against the Iraq War.
Yeah,
second
I
Iraq
think
War.
he probably was. Yeah.
Why?
He's not a war guy, for all the reasons we've talked about. And
he was a hawk, in the Cold War days, and
evil empire, believed that. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's right, though. My memory is that's right.
Okay, so how should he be remembered in history? Final question. And if I've forgotten anything that you think that I ought to know, that people ought to know, tell me.
Great, smart, capacious, optimistic about the future, deeply in love with the country, and saw America as just one big promise and opportunity for everybody, and a naturally inclusive guy. There's a great, I should put a note up on it. One of my favorite quotes is from Bentham, and we have it at the house, and I brought it to the office. Elaine wants it back at the house. Bentham says, the way to put people at ease is to make them comfortable. The best way to make them comfortable is to appear to like them. The best way to appear to like them is actually to like them. And I struggle with that because sometimes I don't. That's the bad side of my view of the world. Jack actually liked them. When he broke into my office with somebody I wasn't expecting to see, I wasn't usually particularly pleased because I was doing something. Turned out to be a Super Bowl player. I overcame it, it's okay. When I'd burst into his office with anybody, everybody, he was thrilled to see me. And that's a gift. That's a human gift. And it's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.